Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And today my guest is Donald Altman. Hello, Donald.
Oh, hi, Isabel, or Anna, I should say. Good to be with you here.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
very,
they're both a beautiful. How did you get the name Anna Isabel? Is Isabel your last name, or is it like a middle name?
it's my middle name. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Well, I have my parents to thank for that. Well, your book is called Travelers. That's the name of your book. And it is a wonderful, easy read, and it's a story. So I think it would be good to begin with to talk about the title Travelers and the story.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the book. I've written a lot of nonfiction, and this. Traveler just, in fact, interesting. Just about a week ago, I heard that it had won a independent book award, two for first novel and for general fiction. So I'm very honored for that. But the story itself, you know, the name Travelers is about the mystery, about we're all kind of travelers here, right? In one way or another. And the story focuses on a psychiatrist who has lost his daughter, and it's heartbreaking for him and his wife, and it's kind of driven a wedge between them and their marriage, and they're both struggling, even many months later after this loss. And he works in a residential psychiatric hospital. So he has to deal with a lot of really distressed, people who are struggling in different ways. And a young man, a suicidal young man, comes into the psych ward. And this book really takes the reader into that world. And I'm a psychotherapist, and I've worked in different kinds of treatment centers. And so I wanted to make it very realistic and what it's kind of like to be in that world. But also how sometimes we don't really treat the person. We treat the diagnostic label. You're labeled, you have major depression or schizophrenia, and people sometimes, the sad thing is that people take those labels and they think of themselves in terms of that label, and they identify and put themselves in that box. And so this book is about how do we get out of that box? And the psychiatrist, he has a feeling that he doesn't like labeling his patients, but because of insurance, he has to do that. And there's this whole system he's kind of stuck in. And it's very materialistic, sees things in a very materialistic way. And in the story, he's challenged, the character is challenged to get out of his own mental boxes of seeing things in a very limited view. It's almost like saying that people are machines, and you give them this pill or you give them this treatment and they'll get better, but we're whole beings. You look at the context of our lives, and our spiritual nature is a big part of who we are. Even if we don't acknowledge it, I believe it is a big part of who we are. And so this is a story about somebody who is very rational. The psychiatrists, they tend to be very rational, but he's forced when a visiting this mysterious woman who calls herself a traveler comes into his life, and she has this little sentient dog that rides on her shoulder all the time called Bear. And when Traveler Jackie and Bear come into his life, things happen that shouldn't be happening. She's able to do things and manifest things that he just can't rationally or logically understand. And he's forced out of his comfort zone and into a journey. And this journey also helped, he's got to really save himself and heal himself. And he's also got to save this young patient who is kind of, it's also kind of a suspense story, because the patient is kind of a political pawn in a way. I don't want to get into the details of the story, but you know, there are forces in the imaginal world and in the real world that the psychiatrist has to face and struggle with. So, and I think we all do, right? We all, how do we find a sense of wellness? And I think that's one of the things in this book that I wanted to do, was to show how we can, even if we're experiencing a depressive episode, or we're anxious, or we're whatever we may be experiencing, you know, it doesn't mean we're broken. I don't think anybody's broken. I think that even in our, what we might, you know, our challenges, or what you might think of as your brokenness, is your whole being, you know, is a sense of wholeness there. And so that's what he comes to understand and learns through the journey that he takes. And I hope that the book will also have that impact on the reader, that you can get inspired and you can see that sometimes even emotional issues you're going through open the door to a spiritual realm, to a new understanding. And it can actually be like an initiation, you know, a spiritual initiation. And it's something that, you know, in our world, we don't often acknowledge. And I think we need to do that.
There's so many things that I like about what you've said, and the regular viewers to this channel will know that I'm an analytical hypnotherapist. And so I often have clients who arrive with labels attached to them, or who are looking for labels to explain, you know, why they're struggling with this, that, or the other. And I'm not a labels person. I flatly refuse to label. It's useful in some respects, you know, for doctors to understand, for psychiatrists, if they're talking to each other, to understand the nature of somebody's behavior and, you know, but what I don't like is the medicalization of sometimes what are very human and understandable reactions to trauma and events that are in people's lives. And so when my clients arrive and I say, okay, that's useful to know, and that's it, that's as much as we're going to discuss that, because then we're going to talk about how they feel about that, how, you know, and what led to the behavior, and et cetera, and that's where the healing then begins. So I recognize that in what you're saying, and I recognized it immediately in the book, you know, his reluctance to have to find the label for this young man. And inside you could see that there's this part of him that would love to take a different approach, but he doesn't quite have the courage to do it.
Yeah.
And so of course he's left without a choice. He has to do it. I thought that was very very touching, actually.
Yeah, it's sometimes you're working, you know, he's working in a system, and the systems want to see everything and want to be able to define everything and give everything a name and a label, code, and it, you know, and it kind of reduces you down to being that label. I mean, in my own work as a therapist, I've had people come in and they say, you know, oh, I'm a depressive, you know, I've had depression in my families, and that's just the way it is. It's as if there's no other choice. And it's sad when you see that. And I never try to talk anybody out of that, but I just want to get them to broaden their view, right? To start to understand things in a different way, and to see that they have more choice over what happens in their life than they might imagine. And when that happens, it's beautiful to see that somebody starts to understand, oh, wait, I'm not really, I'm not this depressive person I thought. I have difficult things in my life, and now I have some tools I can work with to manage things. I'm not stuck.
Exactly. And this is about hope, because the minute people think that there's a very deterministic um, attitude that comes with a label, and it's this is how I am, so I'm doomed forever to be this way.
Well,
And
yeah, it's true. And we think of ourselves sometimes like machines, and but we're complex beings. I mean, yeah, if your bicycle breaks down, maybe you can replace the chain, or you can replace a battery in a car. But how do you replace an emotion in a human being, right? Yeah, we have a real complexity to our being. We're physical beings, we're emotional beings, we're spiritual beings, psychological beings, and we have all of this going on. And, it's kind of a mystery too. I mean, here we are, and we have this amazing capability to do so many different kinds of things. It's a blessing in that way, but also it's a challenge, isn't it? Because life can throw a lot of different things at you, and I think it's not what life gives you, but how you deal with it, right? And the attitude you take can make all the difference in the world.
it's interesting you talk about it as sometimes the big challenges in life act like a kind of spiritual initiation. And
Yeah,
absolutely true, because obviously you and I, we see people in crisis. This is why they come to us, is because they are in crisis. And the growth that happens at an emotional level is huge as they move towards becoming whole again, becoming more healed. But obviously, because of my approach, there's a very spiritual aspect to it too. And it's not all of them, but many of them, their world just becomes bigger and their
hmm.
perspective widens to incorporate some very important metaphysical questions, which very often is at the heart of the crisis, because life is feeling empty and meaningless, but they haven't articulated the questions because they haven't thought of it in that way. And yet it's there, the elephant in the room that nobody's noticed.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think that sometimes we have a breakthrough at the darkest time in our lives. I mean, everybody, I like to say that, if you're in a human body and you have a human mind, you can experience loss in life, you're going to experience grief, you're going to experience changes in your body, you're going to age, different things are going to happen, and changes the nature of we're kind of flowing through. And so this is not, and this is what actually binds us together, I believe, is we all have this in common. We're more alike than we are different. And we look at that, and that's how we can build compassion, is we can start to say, hey, everybody's struggling with this. What can I do to be there with another person suffering? How can I help reduce not just my own suffering, but the suffering of others?
Yes, and that then enables us to begin to find not just connection, but meaning as well. So
Yeah, and that's really what the idea of a traveler is this psychiatrist in the story starts to go experience this journey, and traveler Jackie and her sentient dog kind of end up being guides for him in the story. And actually, maybe I want to read one little thing from the end of the book here that really just kind of describes what travelers are. And he says, uh, that's when I knew that we were all seekers, all stardust travelers on this small blue planet, trying to do our best to make sense of this deliciously implausible existence. And if we couldn't solve anything, the least we could do was to help other travelers who we met on this fleeting journey.
You know, it's made me think about and you still see it in many cultures today, but in ancient Greece and other cultures like that, that hospitality, the notion of hospitality being so important because it was recognized that a traveler is in this kind of liminal state. They're not at home and they haven't arrived at their destination either. So it puts them in a very vulnerable position. So it's incumbent upon others to help them and look after them by playing host and being generous hosts. And it was a very important part of ancient Greek culture. You would not be treated well by Zeus if you broke that code, because travelers were under his patronage. They were protected by Zeus, and
That's
there's no
beautiful.
God than Zeus. So I think there is that sense, and when we remember that we are travelers, and that means that we're all vulnerable, it is incumbent upon us to do our best to help each other along the way. And sometimes we're going to be playing host and we have to be generous with our hospitality. And then there are other times when we're going to seek the help of somebody else who is going to provide us with shelter of some kind and feed us.
And it can be emotional shelter, all different kinds of shelter. I like that word that you mentioned there. And I love the idea that travelers are under the patronage of Zeus. and that really we are all travelers in that sense, aren't we? We're in a transitional space here, and I believe that we don't just die and that's the end of it, but we're traveling through to learn and experience and gain information, knowledge, wisdom.
So as we're all travelers, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, my journey, I had some difficulties in my family of origin with trauma. And I think that's how I ended up doing the work that I'm doing now. So I have to be grateful for that. At the time you don't understand it. And I think it led me into, in my 20s, a major depressive disorder where I was experiencing, just imagine if you can, like you have 1,000 pounds of weights on you, and that's how heavy you feel. And it was difficult at the time, but I was fortunate. I had some people that were other travelers who sheltered me and gave me hope at that difficult time. And also at that time, I started to experience some different non-ordinary reality experiences. And I didn't understand it now, but it was actually a spiritual initiation, or maybe a cosmic initiation, right? And it's funny because when it happened to me, I didn't get frightened. I just thought, oh, let's see what happens here. But it gave me a sense of relief. On the one hand, I was mired in this situation and condition of my life here in the physical material world, which I felt, was struggling. And then I got a view of something bigger than myself. And I realized, wait, this is not all it is. And it gave me a sense of relief. That experience was very fleeting, but it was enough for me to get a bigger view of things. And, I think that what we need to do nowadays is experience the wonder, the mystery of life, the mystery of nature, to have experiences that bring us a sense of joy and lift us up. And also to become a little less mired in the reducing everything down to science. So even the brain now is reduced down to, it's these neurons and they're firing. It's just physical activity. And the nature of consciousness actually is also discussed in Travelers in the book. And what I've described in there is something beyond that reductionist viewpoint, which is what I call a quantum collective, and how we can touch everything, how everything is connected in this amazing way. And sometimes we can experience it if you do enough meditation. And part of my journey was when I was going through some difficulties later in my life, after I got, that depressive experience was in my rearview mirror. And I had many years later on, as things were going well for me, but sometimes old patterns would repeat, right? We carry, who brought this can of worms? So I had to look within, and I had the opportunity to go into a monastery. I met a monk who was from Burma. He was a well-known teaching monk here in the United States by the name of Uthilananda, and he wrote a book called The Four Foundations of Mindfulness. But meeting him and ordaining as a monk in his monastery really put me on a completely different life path that I could not have predicted. I mean, and it was beautiful for me because it got me to see things, to understand the workings of the mind a little better, and it got me to understand that, we talk about labels, that the first thing they do when you enter the monastery, they shave your head. And I had a lot of hair back then, and they held up a lock of my hair in front of me and they said, "This is not you. It's your first lesson." I was like, whoa, what do you mean that's not me? But not to identify yourself with all the things that we think of as what constitutes who we are, that there's something beyond this, and so it was a wonderful experience. And when I left the monastery, and I actually went in knowing it would just be for a period of time. I just knew that I would be doing my work out in the world. And so I started doing workshops, and then went back to school, back to grad school to become a psychotherapist. And it changed the nature of what I was writing. I mean, everything kind of pivoted on that experience. And so that was another initiation for me. I think, we have to open up and not be afraid of changing and doing new things in our life. We never know where that's going to lead, right?
No, we certainly don't know where it's going to lead. But then I'm a great advocate of the word yes. So,
I like that.
yes, it's oh, would you like to try this? Oh, yes, please. Obviously within some sensible parameters, but I think that it's about taking everything in a spirit of adventure as well.
Mm.
And some parts of the adventure are very scary. Sometimes we might end up hurt, but we have to always keep that spirit of adventure, because otherwise there is very little hope and we do become defeated. And you were talking about consciousness and the attitude to the brain, that mechanistic, oh, it's just neurons firing, and we put this drug, we give you this drug and it does this, and we give you this drug and it does that. And so the question then is, where is the soul? Where is the consciousness? Oh, there isn't one. And for ages, I think they were referring to consciousness as the C word in some scientific circles.
Mm.
And yet here we are. And I think most people, their life experience is not mechanistic.
Absolutely. Right.
It's not mechanistic. This is our experience, but because it's deemed to be anecdotal evidence or whatever other label they want to put on it, it's dismissed. And I think this is the gap that exists between reality as the average person experiences it and what some, because it is some sections of the scientific world want to describe life as. So a huge gap in the middle. And that materialist, mechanistic, reductionist view is, I think, now got to the point where it's a religious status.
Yeah, it almost,
Not
I think it is in a way, right? And it's kind of, it's very dogmatic. It's like any kind of fundamentalist approach to anything, right? It sees things in black and white, and it's not open to understanding. It's not open to having a dialogue, a search for truth between two people who just want to know more. Think about how wonderful that would be if people could get together and say, okay, you know, we're on different sides of the fence here, but let's search together. Let's have a dialogue. And
very
and
often language is at the heart of the issue,
mm,
because the mechanistic language that's so cold might actually be describing a facet of existence, but somebody else might describe that same aspect of existence in language that holds more emotion or allows for the possibility that something could be sacred because of its beauty, and
mm.
that its value is beyond, you know, the mechanistic approach. And yet they might both be describing the same thing, but in very different language. And when we understand that sometimes we might be saying the same thing, but we're using different language because we're coming at it from different angles, I think that would already be an improvement.
Oh yeah, you know, it's so funny to me. I mean, I think in science they say, "Oh, we're just being objective," but really nothing is objective when you think about it. Even the experiments are created by a human mind; they're observed by a human mind, right? Um, uh, One time I was leading, if I could share a little story. One time I was leading a mindfulness group. I was teaching at a university in here in the States. And I had the group, it was a mindfulness type, or mindfulness was included in the training, in the class. And I had the group go outside. There was a beautiful grassy field. And I said, I want you to just be present with nature, like when you were a child again. See if you can just go out and experience what's happening. And I noticed, and we did this for 20 minutes. I had a little chime and I chimed it and they all went out there. And I said, I'll chime again when it's time to come back. But I noticed one woman was on all fours, kind of crawling on the grass very slowly. And I couldn't really see what she was looking at or what she was doing. And when we came back in the class and I asked for some people to share their experiences, you know, her hands shot up and I wanted to know what she was doing there on all fours in the grass, and said, well, tell us, share your experience with us. And she told about how she was watching a worm crawl in the grass for 20 minutes, and she lost all sense of herself. And she said she like became one with the worm. And that's a moment of wonder, you know, when you drop the I, the me, the my, the mine. And I want our audience to think about how many times do you phrase things? Are you thinking, do you phrase it as I or me or my or mine during the day? How many times do you use those words? You talked about words and language, right? But here, you know, a scientist would say, well, that's just a worm moving and it's going this and that way or whatever. But to her, she opened up and experienced something that only a human heart could experience, right, in that way. And even though that was many years ago, I've shared this story that remained with me, and I'm sure it remained with her. You know, it's this idea of, you know, you've heard of deja vu, means having been there before. And that's what happens. We get familiar with things, we get acclimated, and we lose the novelty, right, the newness. And but there's also a term in French called jamais vu, which means never having been there before. And so this is the childlike awareness. So I want you to see what it's like to be jamais vu. Even when you meet this person who you've met and they maybe know how to push your button, experience them as if you've never seen them before, with openness, with a sense of curiosity. That's a challenge, isn't it?
It is. And I think we're more likely to do that when we're forced into it. And I'm just thinking about, situations where perhaps a loved one is going away. And suddenly you're thinking about what they mean in your life and all the things they do. And these are things that you've kind of perhaps taken for granted. And yet there it is. And you're going to be deprived of this, hopefully for a short time. But nevertheless, it's going to happen. And you're seeing them more like you used to when you first got to know them, or when they were born, if it's your child. I think those are the moments, and there are moments in life when we are faced with that, and you think, okay, this is interesting, because and we mustn't be too hard on ourselves for the fact that we get accustomed to things. We always think of dogs, for instance, as being very enthusiastic and throughout their lives, but there's a distinct difference between a dog that's a puppy and a dog at the age of 7. And it's very similar to what happens to us. Yes, they're still excited, and yes, they still enjoy life, but it's not that, oh, this is new, and isn't it exciting that you have with a puppy at every moment almost, because everything is new. And anyone who's had the joy of living with a puppy knows what it's like. You can't wait for them to have their first experience of snow or their first experience of the sea, because it's going to be amazing for them.
Yeah.
Well, I think it would be good at this point if people could find out more about your work, Donald. Where could they find you?
Well, you can find me at my website is mindfulpractices.com. That's MINDFUL 1L practices.com. And I have, you can see all my books up there. I've written a lot of nonfiction books, the Mindfulness Toolbox, the Mindfulness Code, 1 Minute Mindfulness, Simply Mindful, which is more like a course on mindfulness if you really wanted to steep yourself. And it's a 7-week course that and there's a lot of interesting practices in there, but it just takes you through a very systematic way of learning to get in this present moment, in the freshness of that present moment. So you can find those books there. I have some different online programs, and of course I have Travelers is up there as well. But you can, and I have a newsletter. I should mention that. Please sign up for my newsletter, and there's a subscribe button on the menu, and just fill that out and we'll get you subscribed to that. That comes out once a month with a new some new research, a new article on mindfulness and how to use it in your life.
Well, I'm going to be putting a link to your website in the description box.
Oh, wonderful.
With a link to the book, which I will remind everyone is called Travelers. Donald, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, well, thank you, Anna. It's been a joy. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be looking at crystals and how they could be helpful to us. Until then, goodbye.